Welcome, everybody. I have here young Guru, and who doesn't need much of an introduction, but I'm going to give a little bit here. So you started out DJing when you were around 12, I guess, and then you've been working as an engineer for a long time now.
Yeah.
And I guess you're most well known for a lot of crafting the sound of Jay-Z for the past 15 or so years, but your artist list is like, I don't know, I don't have enough time to read through it, but everybody in hip hop, basically. If you search for everybody in modern hip hop, you've worked on their records, pretty much.
Pretty much. I don't feel bad about that.
No, I guess not.
I meant the other part, that everybody always focuses on Jay-Z, which he's my brother and my boss, and I love him to death, but I have worked with a lot of other people. But what made me feel good about that was at an award show, Bruce Swedien was there, and everyone was focusing on these two Michael Jackson albums, which is like, okay, you're not gonna find better than those two, but it's like, this is Bruce Swedien, he's worked on everything, you know, like not just these two Michael Jackson albums, but I get it, it's Michael Jackson, so I kind of take it in that same vein that people forget about all the other stuff because it's Jay-Z and Kanye and Beyonce, so.
It's tough to be compared to Bruce Swedien and Michael Jackson, I guess that's too bad, yeah. But yeah, I mean, you've basically crafted a lot of the sound of modern hip hop, and I think you're known for approaching engineering with kind of a producer's mentality.
Yeah.
And that's a lot about what we'll talk about tonight.
Cool.
I think also important is in the past few years you've been working a lot in education as well, and maybe start telling me a little bit about that and what you're doing there.
Well, my mother and most of the women in my family are educators. And it was something where I was trapped in the studio in a good way, you know, not in a negative way, for so long that there wasn't that connection with people. And then what happened was MP3s sort of hit and destroyed the studio business in New York City. So the place where you would go to learn, you know, how to be an engineer in a practical sense, not just book knowledge, but actual working knowledge of dealing with people and how to run a session and how to learn all that stuff isn't really there anymore. So I feel like people that love what we do as engineers and want to teach that, you know, that thing started to get into me. And then going out and talking, I found it really educational for myself, and it was pleasurable to teach. And I caught the teacher bug. And I love teaching. I love that having students that don't understand the concept and you're trying to figure out how to explain it to them, and you see that moment where the spark goes off in their eyes, it gives a spark to me, not only because they're getting the information, but I figured out how to give them the information. It's because everyone learns in a different manner. So not only is it having to know your information backwards and forwards, but it's like, how do you teach this kid? Is this kid more visual? Does he need to see you draw the concept? Is this kid an auditory kid where he needs, no matter how many times you draw it and say it, he needs to hear it, you know, to understand what a compressor is doing? Getting the concept across is an art form in and of itself, and I found that to be a really pleasurable thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, in your words, what's your key role as an engineer?
My key role as an engineer is to deliver a finished record. And that may sound like this broad thing, but that encompasses so much more. And I sort of take on a little bit of this A&R role because of what I meant to the entire Rockefeller Records. So it wasn't this thing where I would go in for a session for 8 hours a day and then leave and then not deal with that artist. We didn't run Baseline Studios like a normal studio. There was no booking of studio time. We locked it out for years in advance. So the artist had free reign to come into the studio whenever they wanted to. So innately, you become intertwined with people's lives, their career, where they're going, and they sort of trust you to guide their career musically. And we had this great balance of people that worked in the office and they love doing office stuff. I'm not one of those people. I don't like cubicles, I don't like the office. I hate meetings about the meeting, you know, like that's stupid to me.
We have some of those too.
Yeah. So I like to actually craft music. I didn't understand how people could A&R from an office. You know, I have to A&R from the studio and be able to direct records and direct people's thought process while they're creating records. So that was part of my job as well, was to sort of control the studio environment and control this chaos of all these different artists coming in and figuring out not only how to divide up the time, but how to be effective with their careers, because they were all in different points in their career. And I guess that's part of my job as well, besides just the normal sonics of the record and deciding what equipment we're going to use and that type of stuff. It's very much the psychology of engineering that was a part of my job as well. Yeah.
And so are you ever alone in the studio, or is it always a social thing with the other people that are in there?
I'm alone during mixes a lot, which I like to be alone for maybe 3 or 4 hours while I'm mixing, and then have the artist come in, or whatever their, plethora of people that they bring. Rap guys like to bring a lot of people to the studio. But over the years, I've developed sort of a relationship with everyone, so they know to sort of leave me alone, or if you're going to be in the room, just be quiet, while I'm trying to do certain things, or don't ask a lot of questions until I tell you that the meal is cooked and it's ready, and then you can comment on it. Just simply because of my way of working, I do a lot of subtractive EQing, which you'll hear me fishing around for a certain frequency with it turned way up, with it's on like +10, and then I'm sweeping frequencies, and then I'll turn it down. So you'll hear me sort of take frequencies out of a bass, and then someone who doesn't know is like, well, why are you taking bass frequencies? I'm like, because I'm making room for the kick, and if you don't shut up, I can't figure out where this is gonna go, So I just like quiet during that time, but then I do like the environment of people when we're finalizing things, because I like to vibe off of people, especially during production. But during mixing, you have to kind of be quiet. Yeah.
And I guess that's a big part of your role as an engineer, is to see how people are going to vibe the music that you're making.
That's the whole point of music. It's the whole point is to transfer some vibration, some feeling, and I never lose sight of that. My instructors were just so good at transferring that idea to me, that this is a technical thing that the people that you're servicing don't understand. So don't fall too far into the technical aspect for the sake of the record, And then sometimes I hear people battling or trying to show off. We have this whole plethora of plugins. So there's a couple records that I've worked on, or that I've heard people work on, where like the engineer is doing all this complicated stuff and only other engineers will know what he's doing, and then the producer is doing all this complicated stuff and the artist is, and it sounds like a mess, versus there's a key to locking in to a groove and to a rhythm, or realizing that some of my favorite records were done by like 3 or 4 instruments or 3 or 4 people, If you listen to Nirvana records, it's 3 people. If you listen to the Meters, it's 4 people. If I could go down the line of these small groups that have this huge sound, but it's about the groove that they create. And I never lose sight of that as someone who's presenting records, because we tend to want to show off and show people that we know all this information. It's sort of like when, I don't know how old everyone is, but it's like when word processors first came out and people were typing their college papers and it had all these different fonts and all this different, it was just like, it looks a mess, just because you had the ability to do it. So it's like, calm down, maybe use that little thing one time in there, and then figure out how to present the paper in the proper way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you said earlier actually about subtractive EQing, it's something you hear from Bruce Sweetian also, I guess, too. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how you would use that in a session? Well,
there's only but so much space, right? There's only but so much space, and I'm talking in terms of headroom, and especially in digital, this is super important. In analog, we had a little bit of leeway of that red. When you start hitting that red, it's like, are you distorting in a really good way? But in digital, you have to really be careful of that headroom. So the more you add on, the more you add on, the more you add on, you're just taking up more space, and then you're going to find yourself like turning stuff down as a whole anyway. So it's better to go, what don't I like about this sound, and take that out, and it carves room to put something else in. It's the physics thing of 2 atoms can't occupy the same space at the same time. So if there's low frequencies There's super low frequency in the bass line, there's super low frequencies in the kick, there's super low frequencies in this 808 kick that you put in. They can't all exist in the same space. So you have to sort of pick which one is more important and carve out the frequency in other things. You have to make decisions, you know, in mixing. And for me, the bottom end is sort of easy because I know what I want. The problem is the mid-range, you know, because everything resides in that mid-range. So you're gonna really have to make decisions on who's gonna win out. So subtractive EQing gives me that ability to make space for other things. Yeah.
I guess there's a lot of things that engineers can learn in school, but all the great engineers seem to have something extra in this regard. Can you speak to some of the unspoken skills that you bring into the sessions?
Yeah, number one is people skills. You know, you can go to school and they can teach you how compressors work and how EQs work and how everything in the studio works. But my very first session was with DMX. Think about that for a second.
Can you tell me about it?
Like, you have to be able to understand the person's personality in order to control the session. And I always say that, but it's not like, you know, it's not like just about like someone being wild and crazy, but it's also, I have 4 kids and I deal with all of my children differently. Artists are just like children, right? It's like knowing the artist will tell you what to do in the studio because you're the person that has to sort of suggest to them, hey, you've tried this 5 times, why don't you take a break? Why don't you go eat and come back? Or you have to know if the artist wants to be just left alone. Or the girl that like sings really well in church because she's in her comfort zone, but then when she sees that red light in the studio and it's studio time, she clams up. So you might suggest like, hey, you need to make everybody leave the room so she can feel comfortable by herself. Or I was doing a band one time and I went and I saw the band and the band was amazing, and then I put them in the studio and I have everything like goboed up so that, you know, I'm getting the perfect sound, but then I noticed that they didn't sound the same as when I saw them live. And I realized that I was cutting off the line of sight by putting up gobos between like the bass player and the drummer. And even though the lead singer's like the front man, the drummer was really the leader of the band. And the bass player needs to be able to look over at the drummer just so the drummer can go, yep, you're killing it. You know, and then he feels comfortable and he's like, but if he can't look over at that guy, it messes up their whole flow. So you have to sort of learn people and learn the environment, and that's the psychology of it. That's what you learn, that's what I learned by actually going to studios and sitting in with Tony Maserati as he's working with people. And I learned more from him than I ever could have learned, you know, in a book. You know, that's the things that you bring. And then my experience of growing up in hip hop, I know the sound of what people are going for, or helping to define the sound by finding the things that were lacking from the music, you know. And to be honest with you, early hip hop sounded like crap, you know, like sonically, it wasn't that good. And I just made it a point to say, hey, I want to take this part and this part and this part and combine them and make this one style of really clear but heavy hip hop that was separated, you know, like going to watch an orchestra and I'm like, okay, these things are placed here for this reason, and the best person is first chair. Like we were just monoed out, you know, in hip hop because our tools were mono. So being able to spread things out and add that space. And then I found a lot of people were mixing left to right really well, but there was no depth in the music. And my teachers were really big on depth. Like, don't just use the reverb for like one space. How far away is the instrument from you? There needs to be some depth in the music. So adding that, I think, was a big factor too in developing my sound.
Do you keep, like, to go on that point, when you're working on depth in a song, are you trying to use like one reverb for lots of tracks, or do you use different reverbs for everything?
Different reverbs for different reasons, you know, depending on what the sound is and where I feel like it should be placed. I'm not this is my way of working. I've seen engineers that literally don't touch their outboard gear or have plug-in, you know, presets saved, things that they've designed saved, and that's their sound. Or, you know, the guys will rearrange tracks to make sure that this thing is going into this and there's a change. I don't do that because no two songs are the same. Or when people are like, well, what was your EQ setting on that? And I'm like, why would you ever want like you would need the exact same vocal recorded at the exact same level. It means nothing. Like I listen. I'm not a numbers guy, right? I can work in SSL blindfolded. So I'm really listening to what's going on instead of me concentrating on numbers. I'm listening because I come from that thing of when there was no computer screen there, you know? So,
I think this is probably the same with EQ and compression. A lot of people look for a preset for compression, but it totally depends on what's incoming to it.
And then you adjust depending on, you know, that's why you should know the compressor, right? And if you, my teachers, again, were good on theory versus application. Like if you know what the thing is and how to work that and what the difference is and what the difference is between VCAs and optos and the advantages and disadvantages of that, then you know how to apply it to whatever sound to get whatever you want. And you'd be surprised at people that come to me like, oh, your kicks are so hard and how did you do that? And I'm like, do you understand attack? You know, do you understand threshold? It's not that difficult. You know, it's just making choices. But people have this thing of where they're like trying to repeat something, and I never try to do that. Every time I start fresh. And then sometimes it doesn't. Some of my best mixes may have one or two things inserted on it and it just really sounded good and I just needed to EQ it on the board, you know, that sort of thing. And then trying to mimic that sound when I went all the way into the box, you know, and I work in both ways. I would love to mix everything, you know, spread out on my SSL, but it's like, it's 2015, everybody doesn't have budgets for that anymore, or the studio may not be available, so you better learn how to mix in the box.
And when you're doing these mixes, do you have an idea at the time what's going to be a hit or what's not going to be a hit?
Sort of, kind of, but you can never really tell. People's taste are fickle, you know, or I don't know, the record could, like, okay, when we were making New York, right, Jay-Z's record, New York, I knew it was a good record, but then I'm sort of questioning, is it the right record at the given time? Which sounds stupid now because it's a hit record, but I'm like, okay, we're making a record called New York. Are people in California gonna really, really play this record and like be in the club going New York in California? You know, I was thinking about things like that, which is sort of my job too, is like perspective. Like, are we doing the right thing at the right time? And there's three things that make it key. It has to be the right music for the right artist at the right time. If you take away one of those things, it's not going to be the, you know, it could be the right music, but for the wrong artist. And it could be the right music for the right artist, but the wrong time, you know, and all those things have to be there. So I have an idea, I trust myself as to what I like, but then I also have been able to learn this skill where I know my personal taste, and I study what the audience likes and where they are, which is why I have to stay on ground level and stay connected to people. It's also why my DJing helps so much, because I have this thing where my friends are now, you know, in their 40s and they're so disconnected from what 18-year-olds like, you know, or a 21-year-old. And I feel blessed that I can go DJ parties and be connected to sort of the youth and understand where they are and the differences and be able to make music that appeals to everyone.
Mm-hmm. So with a lot of, you said that there's a lot of people involved, often people come in with their crews and everything like this. And do you have a specific role in mind when you're going into one of these projects, or do you have to take different roles at different projects?
Yeah, different roles in different projects, but I do, over the years, it's become a thing where the studio environment, again, we did the thing which was so smart. I have this theory, not even a theory, it's proven that the best music comes from a small group of people localized in one place, right? If you look at the immense amount of music that Motown put out, and then you go to Detroit and look and stand in front of this little house, like you could fit that house in this auditorium. It's not, you know how small that place is? Or if you look at like Stax Records, or it's 20 people, I'm talking about secretaries and everything, right? It's a small amount of people. What we did was we were, to me, wasting money by bouncing around New York City to all these different studios. So, you know, the geniuses that Jay, Dame, and Biggs were, they were like, okay, let's just build a studio or buy a studio. And we focused everything at Baseline, and that just allowed my work to just go so much faster. One, because I knew the room. So, you know, having the ability to be in ground level on the design and tuning of a room, you know, I have to give a lot of respect to Dave Malapo, from Pro Audio Design. He designed that room, but I give him a lot of credit for sitting in there with me, and I'm giving a whole bunch of suggestions on how to tune the room. So it's like my room to a certain degree. And then the guy who owned it, he was just like, Guru, I know nothing about the studio business. I'm just here because I'm Jay-Z's friend and I'm running a business. You run this thing. You let me know whatever you need. If you need toilet paper, if you need, a wire, you just let me know. But you run. He gave me free reign to sort of organize everything. And that was a great thing. So it was just like, people at a certain point respected that was my space. So whatever I'm asking guys to do, they would do. And then once you have a certain amount of success, they really trust you. So it went from us like only doing 1 or 2 records a day to us kicking out like 5 or 6 records a day on tape. And then once Pro Tools came, it was like, okay, great, we can do like 15 records in a day. Like digital recording was just like the thing that kicked us all the way into just like go mode. Because you have to remember, I'm balancing 10 acts at any given time that are all really good and really are making, an impact on the culture. So it was a huge balancing act, but people respected my space.
Do you ever have problems with them getting not enough of your time or things like that?
Yeah, people, that, and then we had in-house producers. So imagine Kanye and Just Blaze coming in and trying to produce, and like every artist is over their shoulder, like, can I have that beat? I'm like, you guys got to give them space to work. Sometimes people don't feel like they're getting enough attention, but again, it's like children. You have to space it out and show everybody that they are loved, sort of thing.
Have you ever not been able to solve a situation with an artist?
Yeah, there's been plenty of times where someone's vision and my vision just don't match, and it takes them sort of failing to come back and then go, okay, Guru, you were right. Because I have a vision that may be broader than the vision that you had, because I've been through the experience a million times. Like it was funny to me when we first got Drake in the studio to work on Blueprint 3. And I was having a conversation with him in 40, and I was like, I'm about to tell you guys your whole next 10 years. I know exactly what you're gonna go through, and here's how you deal with it, and here's the problems that you're gonna see, and all of that. I've seen it a million times, so I can kind of tell you what's gonna happen, and then being able to adapt to what's going on now. So I'm like, okay, here's the challenges that we never had to face that you guys are gonna have to face. We had an easy way of getting above all the noise, right? We didn't have all this noise going on when we were producing records at that time period. So that's like the only thing now that artists have to face in terms of how much music they have to put out. Because now, at least in the hip hop world, if you go 2 months without putting out something, the people forget about you, and it's sort of like a new frontier of having to constantly remind people of certain things. Or you have major artists like Drake, who to me right now is like the top of the game, putting out free mixtapes just so that he can remain hot, or Future, this guy had an album that didn't really do too well, and then had to put out 3 mixtapes before he puts out his next album. So it's again, analyzing where we are and just adjusting and figuring out how to best direct artists.
I want to rewind to a couple of things you just said there, because it's really interesting that you're talking about 2 things, which are music coming in a community and also failure to make you move forward, which are both things that came from Dennis and Robert's talk yesterday, I think. Yeah. So can you talk about some of your failures that you've had that helped you to grow?
Failures. No, I've had plenty of them, but I've also had a lot of training in terms of where I come from, and that's the thing. When you have the training, you are used to any situation. I started off as a DJ and understanding the DJ world first, and my whole perspective comes from DJing. So when things are not technically perfect, I know how to adapt to that. So,
crossfade out of it, basically.
Yeah, or give an example. When I got here the day before yesterday, I go to do a club, and I show up, and the crossfader on the mixer didn't work, and one of the turntables didn't work, right? You still got to do the party. I've done parties on people's grandmother's like washer and dryer. It just comes from the training. My failures, I think, are when you don't choose the right thing. I think if one of the biggest mistakes that I made was I kind of pushed Jay to do a double album for Blueprint 2. which in hindsight was a mistake, right? Because Blueprint was this incredibly received album. It's like instant classic. It standed the test of time. So it's like it's become a classic in the hip hop world. So you're coming off of that high, right? Then I'm looking at him and he's just knocking out songs, and I'm like, hey, Tupac and Biggie are the only people that have double albums. Like, we should do a double album, you know, because he's at like 17 songs now. But the rest of the songs became like filler songs. We were doing songs just to make enough songs to do a double album, which I think was a mistake. If you would have took Blueprint 2 and cut that down to 12, it would have been another classic album. But I was pushing and pushing and pushing because I'm looking at Jay on the level of Tupac and Biggie, and like, we gotta equal or do better than what they did. You know, that was sort of a mistake. Or I don't know, I can't think of any just off the top of my head, but I'm not scared to make those mistakes. I'm not scared to let people tell me they don't like a record, you know? And I also get the corporate side of putting out records, which I love the fact that we don't have to deal with that anymore, you know, now with the internet. But I totally understand corporate. I don't fight that. To me, that's part of the game. That's part of what is required to do this. So I never fight that when you feel this huge pressure. You know, there's one thing to be on a label and people are like, oh, you can put your album out. Da, da, da. There's another thing when the artist that you're working with is the dominant force and is going to be, you know, when they tell you like this one album can pay for 10 failures, they're looking at your album to be that album that pays for the 10 failures. So there's a lot of pressure on time, and things have to come out at this particular time, you know, and that's where you start to see people rushing and not doing like the best job that they can do, or, you know, when you haven't put your best foot forward, sort of thing. But I'm not afraid to fail, you know, and that's the biggest thing. Don't be afraid of it.
And how much would you say that you throw away in a session like that? Like, you're talking about maybe you wouldn't have thrown away everything, but in a double album.
Oh, I do way more deleting than I do saving. Way more deleting. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't think people understand how much I critique records and throw away stuff, and that's not good enough. You know, I'm a huge critic. I'm a huge critic of everyone's music, including my own. So I delete a lot of stuff, or just say it's not good enough and we can do better, you know? And that's, I think, self-critique is one of the biggest things. Or if I'm making music, whether or not that's production or engineering wise, if I'm producing, and I rarely try to produce by myself, and even if it's not collaborating with other artists, I just want people in the room. You won't have to ask people if the music is good. If you're making really good music in front of people, they'll be like, yo, this is incredible. You know, like, they're just gonna start telling you that. So you can feel when people really, really love what you're doing, or at least I can. And if it's not good, I'm not married to it. Turn it off.
Does this ever get tense with these artists that if you're deleting a lot of their work, or?
No. Again, the artists trust me. If you look at someone like Freeway, who was an artist on Rockefeller, he's so creative that he would try anything. And in his trying of anything, there's gonna be some stuff that you don't like. So I would easily and honestly tell him, perfect example, we were in Miami, we were at Circle House, a beautiful studio, and he's creating this song and he's singing, and this is a rapper now, and he's like, my piano, something, like he had heard a song and he's trying to recreate that. And I just call him out of the booth. I'm like, Free, what are you doing? That sucks. No, it's really good, Goo, it's really good. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put this on a CD and we're gonna walk out by the pool and we're gonna play this for everyone. And we played it and everyone started laughing at him. And I'm like, don't ever question me again when I'm trying to tell you that it's not good enough. You know, like, you have to show them sometimes. But if you have the relationship with the guy, he knows you're not doing it to make fun of him. I'm trying to make the best you. So if you trust me that I'm trying to make the best you, then you'll know that whatever we put out, at least in my opinion, is going to be our best foot forward. And then they'll never question you ever again.
In a lot of the music you work with, you might have a band, you might have samples. Can you tell me some of the particular tips you use on working with samples, for instance?
Yeah, with samples, if it's just a sample by itself, I sort of developed this way of doing multi-band compression before multi-band compression existed. Just because you're dealing with like sort of 2-track programs, right? Someone's sampling this off of a vinyl record back then, even before CDs were out, or cassette tapes or something. It ends up being some 2-track program that we're sampling. And the sample itself is already a mixed thing. So I would take that, mult it on the SSL. So I'd end up making probably 8 tracks out of those 2 tracks. It's all the exact same thing. And then this first 2, I would filter everything, and that would become just the bass frequencies. And the next 2 is the lower mids. And the next 2 is the upper mids. And the next 2 are the highs. And then I'd blend that all together, compress, EQ, however I wanted to do to control the frequencies. And then all of that would be bussed back to another 2 tracks. So I've sort of controlled something without having separated tracks. It's a way of me sort of controlling frequency-wise what's really in what I'm doing. Because some of this stuff is really screamy, it's coming off of vinyl, it's really crackly, depending on what the program itself is. I'd figure out a way to balance all of that so I can then put other things around it. But what is a great thing is that hip-hoppers, we started out with just sampling, and then it forced people to learn music. And then you're learning scales, and you're learning what key is that. No one in early hip hop cared about the key of the song. Like you hear a lot of wrong stuff, but then people, as they gravitate towards music, and the more you give them, the more they learn, then now we're concerned about everything being in key and adding more instruments to it. So I sort of take the live instruments and blend them together. I want everything to sound like they were all musicians in the same room on the same day. I don't like when the sample is like really low and then the live parts are really high. That sounds stupid to me, or vice versa. I like it to be a blend of everything together. That's just my sound, or the way I perceive how music should be, so that the audience doesn't really know what the difference is. That's just like one technique, but I've done so many different things, and thank God we're in this digital world where now I can manipulate freely all the stuff that I have. So to me, it's a really good time of being able to just be really creative with what I choose to do, and having those choices. When I wanted to say, I was big on reamping things, and I would put an amp anywhere just to test the sound. I don't care, in the machine room, in the hallway, in the bathroom, in the next studio, whatever, just so I could see what the sound sounds like. Now, it's so fun to just sit there and use Guitar Rig, and I can run through all these guitar amps that fast and catch a sound, and oh, that's what I want, and then print that, I love the ease and the quickness of working in a digital realm as well. And then I found that when I first started working digitally, I did miss the tactile surface thing. So then it's like, okay, well then just get a controller that has buttons and knobs and assign that to whatever it is, and then now you're playing, the same way that you would play something else. But instead of me having to have the physical thing, I could just assign this controller to something else next, and something else next, and something else next. To me, it's fun. I like technology. I love new things, and I love new challenges and learning new stuff. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like another recurring theme is spending some time on experimentation,
Yeah, we've lost some of the experimentation because of the fact that in a physical world, you're forced to touch stuff. So the problem is not being in plugins. The problem is that you're not playing with the plugin. Play with it, mess around with it, figure out what it does, and then figure out something that it wasn't designed to do, or really delve into it. It's not the tool. Don't blame the tool. It's you.
Me? Yeah.
It's you. No, it's all of us. You know what I mean? It's the person. So I don't fight this analog versus digital thing. It's a stupid, retarded argument to me. An analog thing is an analog thing, and a digital thing is a digital thing. And if you really get really technical for all the I've had 5-hour conversations with engineers about this, right? But if you get really technical, you're not gonna find 2 1176s that sound exactly the same. They just don't, you know what I mean? We'd have to recap everything, we're not gonna find that. But then engineers will sit there and be like, oh, when I sent this through the analyzer of my real thing, it bumped and did it compress the thing well? Okay, then move on. That's it. But you can't argue me the power of having as many Fairchilds in my computer as possible when I've only really seen one time in real life, and I was scared to touch it because I'm like, I'm not spending 20 G's on that. You know, like, that's a real power to have. So to me, it's just the dumbest argument. Like, use your tool. And if you like working analog, which sometimes I do, I like, you know, some analog thing, then use it, you know? But if you like working digital, like, don't hate on the people that work digitally as well. Or as engineers, whatever's lacking from the digital world, that's when we should perk up. Like, a real designer goes, oh, there's something missing. That's a hole I could fill. You know what I mean? So I applaud people that fill those holes. I was missing the sound of tape. Now with the UA A800, I'm like, oh, they killed it. Let's go. We got tape sound back on my stuff, you know? Like, and people can argue what they want, but I just enjoy when people sort of fill up those holes.
Are there other things you find that are missing these days?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff still missing. I can't wait until the point where the MP3 is gone and everything gets fast enough that we're actually using WAV files. Like, I would love to DJ a party with all WAV files, you know, but we're not at that point yet. The internet's not fast enough, but we should have enough experience now to know that it will get to that point. You know, Moore's Law is not over yet. You know, we haven't gotten to quantum physics yet with that. So it's still gonna keep going, and we're gonna get fast enough to where we won't even have this conversation 10 years from now, you know? Or, I don't know, I'd like to see you guys put in the, like, select all thing in live. That would be a really great thing. So when I chop my samples up, I have to sit there and go, this is on one, all the chops. Like, there needs to be this one thing where I can just assign everything.
There's the product owner from Push around here somewhere? Okay.
I don't know, whoever made that Push thing, man. No, but there's a lot of stuff that I would still like to see, but you know, I give my suggestions on the way I like to work and certain things, and then I understand people have to incorporate. I'm not a programmer, you know, so I understand how hard it is to write code for everything. When I'm just thinking about my one thing, I don't think people think about that. And I think the panel that I was at earlier really explained it, where it's like, hey, I got to think about this for Windows. I got to think about it for Mac. I got to think about every single interface out there that this thing has to work with this. The drivers have to work correctly. And you know, we don't think about all those things when we're at home just making our wish list of things that we have. And then, you know, sometimes the limitations are good, but then sometimes I do want some type of automation that speeds up what I'm doing, because it's about the idea. You know, Just Blaze is another producer that we had at Rockefeller, who's an incredible producer, and he's living proof that the program itself, it doesn't matter to him. I could give you a hit record that he's made on every single format, you know, so the format really does not matter to him. And that's his way of, like, sort of testing out programs that he likes, and then what he falls into, you know? So it's about the idea, because at the end of the day, this is another thing my teachers just stressed. People just listen to the music. It's about 2 speakers. That's really it. What does it sound like? They could care less about all the rest of the stuff. What is the music? But don't lose sight of that, of what you're doing. You're creating music. So give people that feeling, you know? We learn all of this technical stuff so that you can forget about it and just use it. You know, you don't think about, when you're driving, you don't think about, like, driving. You just do it. We've all been in here all day, and I doubt anyone thought about breathing. You just do it. You know what I mean? You just do it. Like, it should be that natural to you that you just do it to get some sort of result.
Great. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there now, so I think we want to take some questions from the audience now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel like the word engineer holds you back? Because the whole speech, you're talking like a producer, an executive producer, a psychological helper. And I think sometimes the rap word of producer and the rock word of producer, and then kids working in their bedroom alone, like, it's blurred as this line, and you engineer, but you're speaking like a producer for the whole thing. And
yeah, I don't trip over labels. You know, if someone understands the art of engineering, when I say engineering, we're talking about musical engineering because we're here, but if you see the hashtag, like, Era of the Engineer, the thing that I'm trying to promote, especially for younger kids, it's about everything being engineered. Everything has been engineered. So I think of it in the natural sense. When I was a kid, my mom had a really good way of, we didn't come up in the best situation, but my mom was really resourceful in finding programs to put me in. And she put me in this program called FAME, which was formed for the advancement of minorities in engineering. So I got a really early lesson into all the forms of engineering. So if I didn't go into musical engineering, I could have been a civil engineer. I could have, built bridges or whatever you want to call it. So it's about problem solving is the essence of engineering. It's problem solving. Like, I'm on this side of the river, I want to get to that side, I build a bridge. That's engineering to me. Someone who's creative and solves problems out of nothing. And figures out, okay, I have all these resources at my disposal. What can I use? And if it doesn't exist, then you create it. Sort of thing. So I don't trip over titles and all those other things. That stuff is frivolous to me. Like, life is too short to be worrying about what the title means or whatever. I want people to listen to the music that I've created, whether or not that's production, whether or not that's mixing. It's all about the music and leaving a legacy of stuff for when you leave. It's not really about me. I really subscribe to the Miles Davis thing of Miles will come on stage and he'd play his trumpet and he's turn his back to the audience, and it's really that statement of don't look at me, listen to what I'm doing. Or it's MF Doom with the mask on, where it's just like, my face does, why does what I look like matter? Listen to my music, it's that thing.
Do you think you don't get credit though for some of these things sometimes, or do you think that?
Yeah, there's times where I've helped out some producers with their kicks and their snares and little rearrangements, and if there's, I can tell you this one because Swiss is a good friend of mine, right? And Swiss had produced a track for Jay, and we were under a timetable. And he hadn't given me, we had did it just off the 2-track. Like, he had sent a 2-track in, and Jay had recorded the record off of that. And then it was time for him to separate the beat, and we were under a really tight schedule, but he was sick. Like, I could hear it in his voice. He's like, Goo, I cannot come to Sony. I'm so sick. Like, I know you have a deadline or whatever. And I was like, you know what? Don't even worry about it. I hung up the phone, and I sat and I analyzed the track for like an hour, and I recreated his track myself. Because I need that in order to make that sound like the rest of the album. So I sent a bounce of that back to him, and I was like, does this sound good enough? And he was like, yeah, why'd you just send me the beat? I was like, because that's my beat. I just redid your beat, so that I could separate it. Sometimes you have to do tricks like that. Or on like Run This Town, Jay was in the studio and he was like, it doesn't sound army enough, or it's not marching enough. So I sort of took a sound from somewhere else and put it in the track. I'm not going to ask for production on a Kanye track just because I put a sound in there. I'm already mixing the record, but it's like some of those little things. But I do understand that question because I've seen engineers save producers 1,000,000 times over, and never get the credit for it. But in my situation, I'm not really tripping over that, like I have my production that's just me, and I'm more proud of, like Rhapsody's songs on Beauty and the Beast, and having people go, I have no idea who she is, and I'm like, great. I don't like preaching to the converted. I want to tell you who she is. And then you get the biggest reward where it's like 2 weeks ago, because of what we put out, Dr. Dre called her to the studio. And it's like, that's it. That's enough confirmation for me, right, that we're doing the right thing. Like, now Dre wants to work with her, great. Like, I don't trip over stuff like that. I have enough production out there where it's like, you get to hear who I am producer-wise, separate from just my engineering stuff. Yeah.
Hi. How do you know when you've finished a track?
When it sounds right to me. I don't know. When it sounds right, when it sounds full, when it sounds like, when I'm happy with it. Like, if we're talking about engineering-wise, I want to please my client at the same time put my fingerprint on it. So I want to make sure that everything is balanced, that you can hear all the sounds, that the most important thing is the prominent thing, be that a vocal, be that a scratch, be that whatever, depending on the type of or style of music that I'm in. Is the emotion coming through on the record the way that it was intended? And then that's when it's finished. Otherwise, you'd be there tweaking forever. I could go back and like tell you things that I may change in a mix if I was to mix it again today, but it wouldn't be that record. That's how I felt on that day. And that's pretty much it. You know, am I getting across the emotion of the record is when it's finished to me. I don't know if that answers everyone's question, but there's no other way for me to put it. There is no one like cookie cutter formula, otherwise like anybody could do it. You know, it just depends on the record.
Another one over here.
Gu, I really wanted to know your opinions on sampling culture. You know, a lot of kids growing up, it's completely okay to go onto SoundCloud or to a song, grab 10 seconds of something, use it, and move on. In your mind, what's the dream for how to sort of officialize that culture? Do we contact the person who we're sampling? Do we pay them for it? What's your vision for how that should work?
There's a twofold answer to that. Number one, legal. I'll do the legal because the creative is my personal opinion second. Legally, yes. If you go on and grab someone's work, I feel like you should pay them for their work. And in essence, when you do it at a smaller level, like say you're not this big blown up person, it's way cheaper, right? And there's so many services that are online now that will help you do sample clearance. But I feel it's only right that if I take someone's work that they already did, then I should be paying them for their work. And I don't care if it's just and I put it on 16 level and I play it again. There's something about the texture of his that made me want to sample it, you know, like. And then I myself get to see the people that I sample from. And there's this situation that I've run into where it's like Bernie Worrell is not getting paid off for all the like Funkadelic albums, right? Or the people that really made the music didn't make the money. So I want to make sure that they get some sort of compensation. I've had artists from the 60s and 70s that we've sampled come to shows and be like, hey man, I was on like my deathbed with no money and I needed a doctor, and my lawyer called me out of the blue and said, you know this Jay-Z guy, he sampled one of your records and I have a $100,000 check here for you. So the person would just come to the show just to thank us for sampling their record. I want to make sure that those artists get paid, you know? Now, creatively, right? Now, this is all my opinion because I'm about to offend a lot of people. I don't like when people just take 4 bars, 8 bars, and just loop that up and call that production, right? That's not really production, that's boring. You're just taking the vibe of what someone else did, and you're really taking away from when I'm trying to explain to someone who doesn't listen to hip hop why Jay Dilla is a genius. Right? And the manipulation of samples and the rearranging of things and having to understand melody, and Pete Rock's genius of being able to take 5 different records and put them together and they're all in key. You know, like there are some really incredible people that create music with samples, but there's so many people that suck at it and they become famous that other people look at that as what all of us do when we're sampling, and that's not really the case. So it's a powerful thing for me to be able to take someone's drum track and break that down into kicks and snares and create my own pattern from that, combine that with something else that I found where I'm recreating what it was, and I could probably play it for the person who made it and they wouldn't know that that's where it came from because I'm trying to be creative. Or, and not to just say this because he's up here, one of the great things that I just discovered about Push like a couple months ago was I was chopping my samples just with the built-in thing, right? And then I was like, oh, well, why does it have a pull-down menu? So then I just discovered this whole other world of people having like automatic drum racks in the thing, and I was like, oh, this is the shit. Like, and then now it instantly makes my samples sound like something completely different. That's where technology and creativity help us in making something that's so different. But creatively, I feel like we should keep pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope. And I feel like that's not happening because people are relying on the same exact presets. You know, like there's a great feel that you can have when you create your own thing versus like sounding like what's on the radio. And I think people are too much focused on trying to sound and emulate what's on the radio. So creatively, I would like to see people study like Dilla, because he went so many different places and shows you the full range of what can be done in hip hop production. And I could argue that he's as great as Mozart. And people would be like, oh, you're crazy. And I'm like, no, I'm not crazy. This guy was really that good. you know, in terms of his construction, but he just constructed with samples. But if I take, someone said this earlier, that the piano is a preset. It's a preset. I hit this and it gives me a note. You didn't create that note, someone else created that note. So all you're doing is playing their notes in a whole bunch of different ways, and there's techniques to do that. Same thing with sampling, there's techniques to everything that we do. So it's about being creative. You can play the piano and sound horrible, and you can sample and sound horrible. You know, it's about how creative the person is.
Hi there. You've mentioned a couple times how important your teachers were to you. Can you just talk about a couple of the more important ones in your life and what it was they taught you that's kind of stuck with you over the years? Just briefly.
I went to this really small school in Rockville, Maryland. And the reason that I went there was because I had a baby at the age of 22 and I could not afford Full Sail, which is where I wanted to go. But I couldn't afford it. So I went to Omega Recording Studios. Greatest decision I ever made in my life. My instructors were working engineers. We had every major format of board. We had an API, we had an SSL, we had a Neve, and we had a Focusrite. And back then, there was no, my DAW class was in Sonic Solutions, which was just a mastering program. I'm really dating myself. But that was my DAW class. But my teachers were so good at explaining concepts at a very basic level, and then you apply that to whatever thing it is. So instead of teaching you how to use this compressor, they taught you what a compressor was and all the forms of that, so that when you walked up to one, you weren't going, how do I work this? You were like, where's the attack? Where's the release? Oh, it's an opto, it doesn't have an attack? Okay, great. I already know how, you know, you sort of know the concepts of those things. My teachers were just excellent at forcing us to use our minds to be creative. It was just the greatest experience for me. And I thirsted for the information. So when they saw that thirst in me, some of my people that were classmates of mine were like hobbyists, and I was like, I just had a kid. This is how I'm gonna feed my daughter. Like, I'm very serious. I got my book and read the whole book in like 2 days. You know, like, that was how serious I was about engineering. And I had this thing in my head where I was being disrespected in the studio. And I hated that. I hated that I didn't know how to move the engineer out of the way, because no disrespect, but in the like late 80s, early 90s, a lot of the older rock engineers hated the fact that they were doing hip hop sessions and that hip hop was starting to take prominence. So they weren't really giving it the respect that it deserved. So I wanted to move that guy out of the way really, really bad. And I expressed that to my teachers, and they sort of saw that in me. And they just trained me and gave me a lot of information that I still use to this day. That's sort of like foundation information, or allowing me to just have free reign in the studio after everyone left. So I would take drums and like record it through the API, record it through the Neve, same drum set, you know, and see which one sounded better. I had that sort of play around time with microphones that students don't have nowadays, or a space where they could just go open that mic closet and then there's just every mic there, and you sort of learn what those things, you know, my teachers gave me that time outside of just class. And I think it's a really important thing that's why I'm so big on education and trying to teach, because that's where I got it from. My teachers were super important to me.
I think we have time for one more maybe, and then wrap everything up. I think there's one right here.
The way you speak, you have, you know, a musician, a producer, engineer, and stuff like that. But today, not everybody can afford to do that. Nobody can necessarily either have studio time, work with producers and stuff like that. So very often you end up being the person who writes the stuff, who somehow produces it, and then you have to perform and all that. So do you have any advice as to, you're not necessarily good at all these things, that's one problem. You're not necessarily interested in all these things either, that's another problem. And then, so what is your advice on how to kind of pace that or choose that?
Figure out what your strengths are and fill in those other places that are your weaknesses with other people that enjoy doing that, right? I have plenty of musicians that have they don't care about the technical aspect. They just want to, Memphis Bleak is a guy that we had before, and he doesn't care about like how the record's mixed or recorded, but when he's doing stuff at home with himself, I taught him enough where it's like, okay, I'm going to teach you how to record yourself so that I can at least work with it, you know, giving him that education. Filling in the gaps with people that do the things that you don't do, but that means being honest with yourself about what you're good at and what you're not good at. You know, myself personally, I know the things that I'm good at, and then things like having meetings and setting calendar dates and all this other stuff that is sort of important, I leave that to my manager. That's what he loves doing. You know, that's why I don't do stuff like that, right? Let him have lunch with people. But I understand what you're saying from a musical standpoint, right? So if you're having to do all of these jobs, the thing about it is now there's so many other people out there that are trying to fill those positions. So I don't care where you are on the planet, someone is there that likes to record. Someone is there that likes to do this or do that. Fill it up, fill the holes up with other people. You know, and then if you're forced to be in this situation where you're by yourself, then we live in the best time where there's this plethora of information on the internet. It just lives there. And it doesn't necessarily have to come from an expert, right? I guarantee you that there's some 15-year-old kids that will smash all of us in programming any of the popular synths because they get to sit and do that all day long. So you go and watch his YouTube video and you figure out how to do that particular thing. Or sometimes you don't need the full, I would like people to have the full education, but in the case of what you're talking about, you can be very specific in your Google search of what you're specifically trying to do, and I guarantee you something will come up to fill in that hole. You know, I don't consider myself a mastering engineer, but on Rhapsody's last album, we didn't have the budget to send it to Tony Dorsey, who masters all of my work. We just didn't. So I bugged Tony about, can you give me some tips? I watched a bunch of stuff on YouTube about mastering. I read everything I could on my whole UAD package about mastering, and I mastered our album because I can hear. You know what I mean? Like, it's filling in those gaps. If you're not the expert, then study. You know, and spend a little time. Like, we spend so much time on websites and on Twitter and on all this other stuff. It's like, spend a little time learning to fill in that hole of what you need. The information is there. It's really there. It's a beautiful time. But I mean, to add on to that, it's also, I realize that, like, I'm the biggest proponent of, man, the studios are gone. And not only the studios are gone, the studio culture is gone, which I'm not the person that sits and complains. It's that real thing of be the change you want to see. So, okay, I'm just going to start teaching, and I'm going to start putting up information. And if you can't afford USC, then I'm going to do a Skillshare class that, like, you can do it for $20. And if you can't afford the $20, I'm going to just rip that and put it on the internet. Like, I have so much stuff out there where I'm trying to explain things that's the purpose, is to give the education to people that want that piece of knowledge. So, you know, other than, I can sit and complain all day, but I'm not the complainer. I'm the get up and just do it person, you know? And I don't want to be the old fogey guy either. You know, there's a lot of that going around, of the old fogey guy, right? I don't want to be that. I want a new generation to come up. Or it's really like, people that complain about where we are right now and don't try to change it is because they were hot 20 years ago, and they're like the quarterback who was hot in high school, and he hasn't done anything else since that time. So he's always referring back to that championship game of like, oh, life was so much better in the 90s. No, you're not hot anymore. That's the problem. So go get hot.
Give it up to Young Guru. Thanks a lot.